All right, so today we're going to talk about um, something that people really don't really talk about in the Old Testament, and that has to do with leprosy. Leprosy is an interesting disease, and I'm going to talk about what what that is and how that relates to us and for the future, to end times, which we are in almost. And it's a very interesting topic, because if you really understand what God is saying to Moses about leprosy, it has direct ties to the apocalypse. It's really amazing. So I'm going to go over that with you all, and I will start sharing my presentation here. And let me see if I could start this here. Oh, let me silence my phone here. Sorry about the interruptions here, but here's our the little um, okay. Here's our PowerPoint presentation. So leprosy is is uh, uh, it can be called as ABSSSI. What is that? ABSSSI is a medical term. Mother Stringfield, would you mind muting yourself? There's a lot of background noise coming through. I'll ask you to unmute later at the end of the presentation. Thank you. And so ABSSSI is a medical term, and it stands for acute bacterial skin and skin structure infection. And most doctors call it abscesses and cellulitis and whatnot, but ABSSSI is the official medical term. And why do I link this to leprosy? Because as I was reading in the scripture about leprosy, it became apparent to me that it wasn't just talking about leprosy, but most skin infections in general, including leprosy. And I think the translators from King James, they were lumping it all together as leprosy. But when I was reading it, it was apparent that it wasn't just that. And I will get into why this passage or these set of rules or the quarantine laws about the skin infections have direct prophetic correlation to our future in the end times. So here's an interesting thing that Jesus said in book of Luke in chapter 24, verse 44 to 45. He said this, and he said unto them, this was right before Jesus ascended into heaven. So the disciples were all gathered, and this was like part of his parting words, or right before he said these words. These are the words which I spake unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled, which were written in the law of Moses, and in the prophets, and in the Psalms concerning me. Then open he their understanding, that they might understand the scriptures. And so I included this just to show you that even Jesus, right before he went back to heaven, he was telling his disciples, and he was teaching them about these laws. He was teaching them the Old Testament, the prophets, the Psalms. He was reminding them. And not only that, not only did he teach them these things, he said, these are all about me, concerning me, you know, and I've told you guys many times before that whenever we get stuck in the Old Testament about some of these specifics, very confusing sometimes, if you think about Jesus, everything makes sense. And that's because it is about him. And Jesus himself said that it is about him. He said, it's concerning me. These laws are about me. So what I'm about to tell you It's not what I'm telling you. It's what Jesus said. He said these laws, these leprosy laws, all these laws are about me. And and um, and then he says, then he opened their understanding that they might understand the scriptures. And so even though he taught them, he had to open up their understanding. So just because you get taught doesn't mean you're going to understand what I'm going to say today. You have to ask God to help you understand what I'm about to tell you, because it's not intuitive. It's really hard to understand. So God has to open your mind, open your heart to really understand this stuff. And so, um, so this is a little outline of what I'm going to go over today. I'm going to go over a New Testament passage about the healing of a leper. And then I'm going to talk about the disease itself from a medical perspective, about what leprosy is, and skin infections in general as well. So I'm going to go over a lot of medical information, and I'm doing that not because because I'm trying to show off my medical knowledge or something, but it's more because I wanted you guys to understand the disease process, and I'm hoping that will help you understand what you read, because I have a little bit better insight into what I'm reading about these things because I have a medical background, medical knowledge. And I'm trying to impart that knowledge to you. So when you read these passages, you appreciate it a little bit more from a medical perspective, and realize how scientific these things are. And then I'm going to go over the actual Old Testament law about the leprosy or the skin infections. And then along the way, I'll point out how it links to certain end time events, specifically to rapture, when it comes to the rapture events in the end times. And so let's dive into it. In book of Luke, chapter 5, Jesus heals this leprous man, and he says, and it came to pass, when he was in a certain city, behold, a man full of leprosy. I believe this guy is a Simon the leper, who later hosted the gathering toward the end of Jesus' ministry, where a lady was, a lady came with the alabaster jar, broke out the precious oil and all that. I think this is the man. I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is the man who, seeing Jesus, fell on his face and besought him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And he put forth his hand and touched him, Jesus, saying, I will, be thou clean. And immediately the leprosy departed from him. Immediately. No quarantine necessary here, just immediately. And he charged them to tell no man, but go and show thyself to the priest, and offer for thy cleansing according as Moses commanded, for a testimony unto them. And so when you read this, to a casual reader, you think, wow, Jesus performed this miracle. That's great, and he tells them, don't tell anybody, but go to the priest instead and be quiet about the whole thing. And that's the end of the story. No, 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 no. There's much more significant things that are hidden here. And one other thing is that Jesus, one of the most important thing here is that Jesus tells the man to go to the priest, right? So this guy is a Hebrew, he's Jewish, because if he's not Jewish, he wouldn't tell him to go, show himself to the priest. Only the Jews do that. So we know that he is a Jewish man who will be familiar with the process of being clean from a skin disease. In fact, he suffered with this for a while, I bet. And so he knows the procedure, how to be clean. And he probably tried many times, but he was declared unclean, which meant that he was outside of the camp. it was forbidden to join the rest of the society, rest of the Jewish clan. So he spent time outside the camp, like a outcast of society. And so so nobody would touch him. Nobody would hang out with him. And for Jesus to touch him was a no-no as a Jewish person. That would have been forbidden because he would defile himself. And if you notice that this guy fell on his face and he worshiped him and he wanted to be clean from Jesus. Of course, he heard all these miracles happening through Jesus, so that's why he came. But also, he recognized by him, whether he realized it or not, by coming to Jesus, he was in effect uh, saying that he is the high priest, because only the priest can declare somebody clean from leprosy. So by him doing this, coming to Jesus, he was actually making Jesus as a priest who can declare him clean. And so, of course, Jesus is the high priest of the order of Melchizedek, not of Aaronic descent. And so he is actually has a higher authority than Aaron and his sons. And so he actually came to the right guy, besides the fact that he is a miracle worker, but also from a priestly Hebraic or Jewish tradition, he came to the right guy to be declared clean by him. And so when Jesus says, I will and be thou clean, that means the high priest who is over Aaron and his sons has declared him clean. But he says you still need to go and show yourself to the other priest, because in order to join the rest of the Jewish society, the Hebrew society, he needed to be declared clean officially by their law. And so, and of course, Jesus would never do anything that would go outside of the Jewish laws as well, because he came to fulfill it, and he fulfilled all the laws. And another thing is that he also tells him not to tell anybody, not to tell anybody. You know, when you would think that, you know, when some miracles occur, what do we do? We want to tell everybody. We want to tell everybody. But Jesus was not like that. He was not about bragging. He was a completely humble person. And also he realized that it would have been a premature, you know, celebration, because the more his name gets out, the Jewish authorities and the scribes and the Pharisees, they're out to get him. And so the more word gets out, the more likelihood that it would shorten his ministry. So for to fulfill everything, it wasn't his time yet. And so he tells the man, the probably the Simon the leper, go and don't tell anybody, okay? Because it's not time yet. But instead, do your thing so that you could join the rest of the camp, rest of the clan, and rejoin society and live a normal life and be a testimony unto everybody. Tell them that the high priest, the Messiah, cleansed you. And this is a really great passage to lead into what we're about to talk about here. And so first, I want to tell you, it's really interesting that I am going over this topic, because I actually did a lot of clinical trials on skin infections. And in fact, 2 years ago, my work was published in one of the prestigious journals, The Lancet. And if you look at here, you will see my name over here, Elliot Shin. So what I'm telling you is that I actually have a little bit more than usual familiarity of this topic, because I've actually been on the forefront of research in this topic. So what I'm about to tell you is some of this stuff usual doctors don't even know, or they don't really know it in detail like I do. So what I'm about to tell you is very thorough explanation of this topic. And so let's talk a little bit from a medical standpoint. what leprosy is. What is the epidemiology? Meaning, who's more prone to get this? It's interestingly, kids are more vulnerable than the adults. And if you talk about leprosy in specifically, and currently the endemic areas are in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and certain areas of the United States like Texas, Louisiana, Hawaii, and California. But the most common area currently in our world is in India. When they say Asia, that means India. And in the ancient times, I guess, Africa, meaning where the Israelites would have been during the 40 years in the desert, the leprosy would have been there. So it is part of the disease when it was translated as leprosy. So the etiology is meaning what's causing it. It's caused by this bacteria called Mycobacterium leprae, or it's a type of a bacteria in the class of acid-fast bacilli. And tuberculosis, by the way, is part of this acid-fast bacilli bacteria. And so the pathophysiology, how does it cause disease? Is it causes a chronic infection, granulomatous infection, meaning it causes like a chronic irritation on the skin, and the incubation period it ranges from 3 to 20 years. So you could be incubating this and not have any symptoms. And so you could be a carrier for 20 years and all of a sudden pops up. And it grows best in the cooler parts of your body around 96 degrees, meaning not like in your central body area, but in the extremities, in the peripheral parts of your body. So the transmission is mainly through the nasal secretions from untreated patients. So if you wipe your nose, you touch your nose, and you shake your hand, it's very easy to transmit it that way. But it's not transmitted easily from a casual contact. But there are two types of leprosy. There's a one called tuberculoid leprosy, which affects the nerves predominantly, and then the skin one is called that leprotomous leprosy, and it is usually symmetric, and it has skin rashes or skin manifestation of this macules, macules are more flat rashes, and then the like a redness or something similar to that, or papules are little eruptions, like it's raised up, and these lesions usually have a very high bacterial load. And so what are the signs of leprosy? There's skin lesions. I told you, I described the macules, the papules. The nodules are little bumps, and the plaques are little plaques, like I think people understand what plaques are. And so, in a dark-skinned person, which would have been for the Israelites, because the Israelites in those days were tanned, and they were a little darker skin. And so on the darker skinned people, this appears hypopigmented or whitish, and you will read that in the scripture. It's like God talks about the whitish spots, but it can also be more darker in others who are not dark skin. So it can be both light skin or white appear whitish, or it could be reddish or darker as well. And because it affects the nerve, the sensation is dulled a lot of times, and the outer parts of your eyebrow, you start losing it as well. And that's interesting, because God tells in the Levitical chapter to shave off the eyebrow, shave off all the hairs, including the eyebrow. So God knew all this stuff, obviously. And it affects the face, ears, buttocks, the knees. These are the areas that are cooler in temperature, and it spares the central regions, the groin, axilla, the hair covered scalp, because they're warmer. And And you have the nose, throat changes, you have all that secretions, and it may obstruct your airway. You could have some laryngitis, some hoarseness in your voice. Neurological change affects the nerve. It could affect your nerves in your arms and legs and your ears. And it could lead to muscle atrophy, shrinkage of your muscles because the nerves are not working, so your muscles shrink. And and this is actually one of the most frequent cause of contractures or crippling of your hand in the world. Um, and and so if you see somebody with a crippled hand in the third world country, you have to rule out leprosy here, especially if they're in India. And then there are also eye changes because eyes have nerves, and you could have corneal ulcerations from the infection and ultimately causing blindness. So it affects all kinds of body systems, not just the skin. And how do you diagnose this? You diagnose this with the skin biopsy under the microscope. You isolate the bacteria, and then there's also a polymerase chain reaction. It's the same test that you do for coronavirus. Actually, you could do like a DNA type of testing. Um, the serology is a blood work. You could get blood work and you could get it diagnosed that way as well. How about the treatment? The leprosy, interestingly, surprisingly, is curable. It is curable in modern age. It wasn't in the biblical times, but it is curable with double or triple antibiotic treatment, depending on which agent that you use. But you got to be treated for at least 2 years. It's extensive, like prolonged treatment, but it is curable. And and then I'm going to go over this. So I told you that this in Leviticus, it's translated as leprosy, but when you read it, if you know medicine, it's obvious that it is not just talking about leprosy. And so it is talking about skin infections in general. I told you the official medical term is acute bacterial skin and skin structure infections, ABSSSI. So the cause of this is mostly from a staphylococcal infection, or lay people usually call it the staph infection. Whenever we have skin infections, people look at it as a staph infection. That's caused by Staphylococcal aureus, and usually it is a superbug called MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcal aureus, and used to be only be found in the hospitals, but now it's spread to the community. And it's sometimes it's not just the staph infections, but other bacteria like a streptococcal species as well. And there are many other bacteria that can cause skin infections, but these are the most common bugs that can do it. And and so and so what happens with these bugs is that they can lodge themselves in the ingrown hairs. It could just happen without anything, like it could be just spontaneous, because these organisms or bugs cohabit our skin, and then it could infect our cysts that you may have in your body. If you get hurt, if you have any injury or wound for any reason, including surgical wounds, it could get infected by these bugs and cause it. And a lot of people say, "Oh, I got a spider bite. I got a skin infection from spider bite," but those are rarely due to spider bites. A lot of people don't have spider bites, but they think they do. And spider bites can cause skin infections too, but it's not that common. And so what are the types of skin infections? There are cellulitis and abscesses. The cellulitis are just soft tissue infections without the warm, tender, reddish lesion or the swelling, or we call that induration, which is kind of hard and raised up lesion. And then the edema is a swelling, and it doesn't have the fluctuance. Fluctuance is the pus pocket, people commonly know it as. Is the pus pocket that's brewing underneath the soft tissue. So if you don't have a pus pocket, that's a soft tissue infection, and that's cellulitis. And you'll see this when you read Book of Leviticus, the descriptions of this in common layman's terms. And So the wound infection is a abscess, it's a fluctuant abscess that is caused by an injury, whether it was a surgical injury or surgical wound to any blunt force or any type of injury, including a needle marks or anything that compromise the integrity of the skin. There will be a wound infection, and then we call it major cutaneous abscess for spontaneous fluctuant abscesses that develop. And the treatment for this is you have to cut it out. If it's a abscess, if it's like if it's a boil, pustular boil underneath the skin, you gotta cut it. We call that incision and drainage. Antibiotic alone would not cure this if that's the case. But cellulitis is there's nothing to cut. For those wounds, you have to be treated with antibiotics. And usually the antibiotics course lasts from 7 to 14 days, which is exactly what the quarantine laws say in Book of Leviticus. And definitions, so God in Book of, getting into Leviticus now in chapter 13, God sets out some definitions for the priest, for Aaron and his sons to examine, kind of play doctor, even though they're not. So God teaches them, give them a little lesson, just like what I just did with you guys about the whole disease process. So he provides them like these kind of definitions. Arising, he says arising, and this rising in the medical sense is what I just told you just now. We will call that induration or edema or swelling or fluctuance or pus pocket. When there's a pus pocket, there'll be a rising, if you will. So the rising can include all these medical terms. And a scab, I think we understand what a scab is. A scab is a dried up lesion, whether it was from a pus that a boil that busted and drained and it kind of dried up. That's a scab. Or it could even be a blood that bled out and then it kind of dried up, and it forms a scab. So you would see a scab usually on an older lesion. And then a bright spot. He describes a bright spot, and it is usually red, but like I told you before, it could be hypopigmented or whitish, lighter. Macule, meaning it's just a flat rash. So bright spot is a flat rash, but we in the skin disease world, we call it an erythematous macule or reddish spot. So God goes into this description about white hairs, white hair with fluctuance, or he calls the fluctuance deeper than the skin. So subcutaneous, it's a deeper than skin lesion or subcutaneous lesion, meaning it's underneath, it's a fluctuant infection, it's a festering boil, it's a pus pocket underneath, and there's a white hair, and he calls that leprosy and unclean. He calls it unclean and leprosy. Well, medically, if you look at this, by definition, it's an infected pus pocket, which is unclean. It's filled with bacteria and white blood cells and pus and purulence. And why would there be white hair with this? I thought about this and I was like, okay. Well, I think it's because maybe the pus from underneath the skin, from the fluctuance, kind of leaked out and stained the hair. Usually people in the desert from the Israelites had a darker complexion and darker hair. And so for their darker hair to be white, it would have to have been some sort of cover with some whitish material or the pus. And so if there's a pus covering the hair, obviously it's unclean. And obviously it's a skin infection. And so then the King James translators called this leprosy, but I believe it could be leprosy, but it could also be a bacterial skin infection. And so you see how detailed God's description is and how it correlates even in the medical terms. You know, he didn't use the medical terms, obviously, because these terms came through modern day science, but he calls it these specific terms to describe it in different situations when he talks about these Levitical laws. very scientific. It is amazing when you look at it from a scientific